I think, to me, what I talk about is the natural way of life, and I think 90% of the world live an alternative way of life. So the whole so-called alternative movement, I think, is appropriate, and everybody else who does it a different way, I think they're the alternative. So to me, I'm an appropriate person.
A normal person?
No, God no. No, normal puts you in hospital. You don't ever want to be normal. Normal puts you in hospital. Normal people, they criticize themselves, they get angry, they get aggressive, they stress out, they get tired. No, I'm not normal.
How would you define yourself then?
Well, let's put it this way, and to be honest, I never criticize myself, I never worry, I've forgotten what anxiety feels like, I never get angry. I've been angry once in the last 20 years. I never get tired, and that's the truth. I don't stress. All those negatives, I don't do them, because to me, it's not necessary. I don't have fear, and you're looking at me as if I'm not normal, which is exactly my point.
So Michael, how did that came about? I think you were not born this way. You were born this way?
No, I wasn't born this way. How did it come about? That's an interesting question. We've got to go back then. When I was in my early 20s, my father died of cancer, and I could see family problems looming, and so I emigrated to Tasmania, which is the island state of Australia. And I was married. I was about 26. I was married, and we had 2 children. And while I was there, I continued my career of farming. I'd always worked for my father, but I wanted to be a beef farmer, but economic circumstances forced me to be a dairy farmer. And then I began to notice that the way I farmed didn't really work all that well. But then I modelled myself on the local farmers. And so then, because I wasn't a local, I began to think about things a bit more. And I sort of headed in a different direction. In hindsight, I would say what was happening was, when we're born, our parents tell us, they tend to project us on a path to success. And so we all want to be successful. And particularly the parents want their children to be successful. And so often the soul is on one journey and the personality is on another journey. And when I got to Tasmania, not through me, but the soul and the personality came together on the same journey. And so the soul began to ask questions that the personality never considered. And so I found myself in a very unusual position of questioning things that I'd never really questioned. You've got to remember, I was very right-brain dominant, so we look at the world in a different way. I left school at 14, and so I had pretty low self-esteem, thinking I was not educated properly, which in fact I wasn't. And so I slipped through the net of normality quite early. I was a tadpole that got away. And so in Tasmania, things went along, but when I was 34, 35, I came out of the house one morning, and it was about 20 minutes to 5, ready for my milking. And I'd made a roundabout. We had 4 children by now, and I'd made a roundabout, just a small one. I jumped on it, and as I spun around, I thought to myself, so why am I milking cows? Because I really like cows, but I hated milking. And it came to me immediately that fear cracks the whip. And I bend over and milk cows, and I didn't like the answer. So I thought, so how have I ended up in this situation? Here I am a hill farmer in Tasmania. How did this all unfold? And I wasn't really sure. I sort of thought to myself, I seem to be a victim of circumstances. Why would the circumstances put me this direction? Why would they make things come this way? And so then I thought, so where am I going in life? And I thought, well, I don't know really where I'm going. Where have I come from? And suddenly this question wasn't biological. Where have I come from? I don't really know. And then the big one hit me, and it hit very, very hard. And I'd never even considered it until that moment. So who am I? And I thought, wow, who am I? And that really hit me. And so I went back into my late wife, and I said to her, she said, what are you doing back indoors? I said, I had this question, who am I? And she said, I've been thinking things like that lately. I said, well, you know what, I want to know. I'm Aries, we don't mess around. It took me 15 years to find out, but that 15 years took me away from farming. It took me right around Australia in a caravan with the 4 kids and the wife, and I started a community based on the Findhorn community in Australia. And then in Findhorn community, I started a similar one. And it took me out of that, and gradually I realized, this is my journey. And so, in that journey, I began the transformation of my life. I didn't follow anybody, I read a lot of books, but there were many key incidents that took place. One of those, for instance, when my oldest son was about 12, I took him to a speed reading course. And I sat outside because as a farmer in Tasmania at that stage, it was a struggle. It was seriously struggling. There were economic reasons. And the guy came out and said, well, why don't you do it? I said, well, quite honestly, I can't afford it. He said, oh, no problem. He said, we'll trade. And my low self-esteem, I said, well, what can I trade you with? He said, can you teach me self-sufficiency? I said, yeah, I can teach you that. And so I went in, and to keep it short, I became the star pupil. In 8 weeks of speed reading, I was so far ahead of the others. And at the very end, when there was a test, all the others were teachers, apart from my son and I. And I looked like I probably weighed 20 kilos more than I weigh now. I looked like I'd just climbed out of the wrestling ring. And they were very affronted that I had beaten them so thoroughly in a final test. So we did another final test because they thought I cheated. I still haven't worked out how you could have cheated, but anyway. So I did a bit better that time. And then they gave up on it. But that did something for me. I thought, my God, these are all teachers, and I've just beaten them completely in this. And so there are a number of incidents like that. But we had to read a book. Speed read a book, and it was called Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz, who was one of the first plastic surgeons. So you say to him, my nose is bent, this is ruining my life. And he'd say, no, you're ruining your life, but your bent nose has nothing to do with it. You're blaming that. And so he would happily straighten it, but he would say to him, it's nothing to do with your bent nose. Today they don't have that sort of ethics. But Maxwell Maltz did have. He's one of the earliest ones. And so he talked about all the boxes people are in. And I realized, oh my God, I am in so many boxes. Boxes of beliefs, boxes, my parental boxes, my school boxes, your peer group boxes, my own created boxes, boxes and boxes. So I decided I'm coming out. It took me a long time, but eventually, if there's any more boxes, which there probably is, I can't see them. And so my life was not so much about making money. To be successful, right-brainers couldn't care less. And it's just not my way of thinking. But I wanted to know who I am, and it took me 15 years, and then I found out. And that 15 years was a downhill journey of sickness and suffering and pain. And people have read my books, and I've got about 15 out there. They sort of know that I've... my classroom was the hard knocks of life.
Yeah. Some teachers say, without crisis, no awakening. Do you agree?
I went through crisis. I went through a very powerful crisis. In fact, I was about 2 days off death. And instead of the body died, identity died. I mean, I play identity. If I go to the Netherlands and they say, well, who are you? If I tell them, well, I'm a magnificent, metaphysical, multidimensional, immortal being of love and light, they'll probably say, well, we have a little room for people like you. And so I wouldn't get into the country.
Yeah.
So I play the identity game, but it's not really who I am.
No. But that identity can become quite a burden for you.
not for me, but it's a burden for most people, because every time the body dies, there's the opportunity to let go of identity. But that identity, ego, holds on, and so when we incarnate again, we immediately establish another identity and go straight back into the same illusion. I don't live in the illusion. It's like you walk in a dream awake.
Before the interview started, we chatted a little bit about your age. You look like, let's say, 60, 65.
You're very kind.
The same I had with Eckhart Tolle when I met him. How come it looks like the clock stopped?
Yeah, actually in many ways the biological clock stops. And I haven't met Eckhart, but I can absolutely believe, because to me he's absolutely one of the enlightened people. And what happens is, I have unconditional love for myself. Unconditional. Mm-hmm. So I never criticize, never judge myself, never look in the mirror, I'm not good enough. I did 49 years of that, because I went through my spiritual enlightenment at about 49 years of age, 49 and 3 months. And so I never do any of that. And I love my body, I talk to my body, I talk to the cells of my body. And it tells me what I need to know, how to look after it. And only just recently I realised that I need to bring the body in line with my fairly high state of consciousness. And so now I've taken scat out of my diet. Scat is sugar, coffee, alcohol, tobacco. Well, tobacco went out 50 years ago. Alcohol, I've never really been into it. Well, that was easy. Coffee, I liked my coffee. Yeah. So I haven't had a coffee in 3.5 months, and I won't drink coffee again. Sugar was the tough one, because I could honestly say I was a chocoholic. I used to eat my way through chocolate, and I haven't had chocolate in 3.5 months, and I won't ever take chocolate again.
What changed?
Well, you really want to know that story? I'll be honest. At 75, I suddenly realised I had a prostate problem. Not prostate cancer, but prostate problems in men, probably 1 in 500 doesn't get it. And at 75, suddenly I had it. And so for 4 years I took all the, I'm serious when I say there's probably 1,000 cures, except none of them cure it. But they have fun selling them. I don't take drugs. I don't do any of those sort of prescription drugs. Mm-hmm. And so I took all herbal remedies, and none of them did any good. So one day I'm having a talk with Max. Max is my body consciousness, the body intelligence. If you get 50 trillion cells together, they all have a certain degree of intelligence. And so your body overall has a body consciousness, or a body elemental, or a body intelligence. So I call mine Max, which is short for maximum potential. And so Max often we'd have discussions to maximise my physical potential. And so I said to him, you're not being very friendly, I have this prostate problem. He said, well, it's not about us not being friendly, you're not friendly. I said, what do you mean I'm not friendly? He said, well, you put out a projection to live 150 years. And that's a strong intention, and that energy counts. And you have the consciousness to do that, but your body at this stage won't be able to do that. I said, I think I've got a good body. Max said, well, I refer you to have a chat with your prostate. So I thought, okay, this is getting a bit weird even for me. And so I said to the prostate, you're not very friendly. And the prostate said, no, you're the one who's not very friendly. I said, how do you mean? And the prostate said, you keep eating inflammatory foods. So I get inflamed. In a way, I'm your monitor, I'm your barometer. I'm telling you, if I'm swelling, this is not good in your body. And so I said, okay, I see that. So then I checked out, Googled inflammatory foods, and found out which ones they are. Sugar's the number one. And so I decided, okay, I won't eat any more of these. In 3.5 months, my prostate is improved by about 85%. And I'm not bothering with the medicines. Not that they made any difference anyway. So I'm changing my diet. So then I can feel already the consciousness of the body rising. I feel that in certain ways. But it was interesting in the early stages to hear my brain saying, okay, in between like a break in an intensive, how about we have a piece of chocolate? And my body is saying no, but my brain is saying yes. And so your brain doesn't really know what the body wants because the brain gets addicted. And I read that it's more difficult to get off sugar than it is cocaine, because it's the same pleasure centre. Having never taken cocaine, I wouldn't have any clue about that. But I haven't really found it a great problem at all. Certainly I use willpower, but now I hardly need to.
That's interesting what you say. So it's not the body that gets addicted to stuff like that? It's the brain?
It's definitely the brain with things like that. The body can get addicted because if you eat junk food, gradually your body gets more and more acid. And that acidity creates and maintains a certain microbiotic culture in your body that wants more acidity. But I've never really had that problem. My problem was really, the biggie was sugar. Coffee, I could deal with that. That was no problem. And so now the body's going through changes, and I'm really, really aware of that. I can feel it happening in me. And so, the sort of youth is the fact that when you live more in the moment, if you're in the moment entirely, you're out of linear time. Because linear time is never in the moment. The moment is spherical time. And so as you live more and more in the moment, you never worry, you never stress, you never criticize, you never get angry. They consume your energy and they age the body. Particularly, they really age the body. And so when you treat the body as your own lover, and you love your body, and you treat it with respect, and you talk to it, and you will say to it, how about that cream brulee? And your body quietly says, not a good idea. Then you eat it, and about 3 o'clock next morning you find, yes, that was right, not a good idea.
Yeah. Michael, then there are some teachers from the Evita world who tell me that I'm not the body.
Of course you're not the body, but that body is a temple of your spirit. You are a soul. Most people look on themselves as a body personality with the soul. And the soul is like a spare handbag. But in fact, you are an immortal soul with a physical body. But that physical body is the vehicle of the soul you are. And that vehicle needs respect. And it's no good saying, okay, one of the paradoxes and the traps of our time is, it's my observation that we are holistic beings. And everyone would agree to that. Enlightenment should be a holistic. So you can become spiritually enlightened and still not know what unconditional love is, and still not have emotional balance. I could name a few who've been there and are now gone, but I won't do that. It's not necessary. And so for me, when I became spiritually enlightened, for 2 years I sat on what I call the plateau of enlightened complacency. And there was a few others up there, but it was a bit boring. And so I thought to myself, I think I'll come down. And then I came down and realized, okay, well the truth is I've just left kindergarten. And now I'm enlightened, I've left kindergarten. So now I'll go into junior school. So I put myself into junior school. Senior, you don't do senior in this reality at all. You move into another realm. And so I consider today I'm in 5th year junior school. I have no idea whether I'll reach 7th school. I don't try to do anything. I love being me. And that seems to be enough.
So enlightenment is the beginning. It's not an end point.
It's not an end point at all. And the people who make the jokes, this is it, this is the end, have never been enlightened. But then I moved on and I continued on and I came to the point of unconditional love. And unconditional love was more powerful to me than just enlightenment. Unconditional love, I was consumed with love for myself. I realized I loved all humanity. Quite honestly, that's why I do what I do. You see, when you love unconditionally, it's no longer personal. Now, I've got a lovely wife over there, as you can see. And there is, of course, a level of emotion. But everybody, there we go again, everybody thinks that love is an emotion. Love is not an emotion. Never has been and never will be.
What is it then?
Love is the power of creation. And so when you're loving yourself, you're recreating yourself in the image of love. And when you're loving other people, your energy is affecting them. And I watch people who go through the intensives, and particularly nowadays when I've really totally given myself to it fully, I watch people's lives transform. And they write to me and say, my whole life, you've changed my whole life. I write back and say, thank you, but I don't change your life, you do. I show you the way it's possible. I can put a person's, if you're in a dark room, I can put the finger on the switch, but I'm not allowed to push it down. I can't do that. Everybody has to switch the light on for themselves. And so that unconditional love was a monumental thing. And then at that moment, that balanced my emotions. And so I no longer have imbalanced emotions. Most people control their emotions. I teach emotional balance. If you balance your emotions, it works. You see, Peter, I'm known as a spiritual teacher, and I finally accept that after 15 years of rejecting it. I finally accept it. But to me, there's two ways of life. One way works, and the other way doesn't work. And seriously, about 94% live life in a way that doesn't work. About 6% live in a way that works. So in a way that works, you're not interested in success. There's no such thing as success. There's no such thing as failure. They're all just human concepts. And you can be a multi-millionaire in a way that doesn't work, and everybody calls you a success. But, in a way like Trump. Trump is a very, very wealthy person, but he's not everybody's role model of how we should be. And so you begin to see that success, you look at the wealthy and they're dying, miserable, alone, isolated. They have emotional problems, they have physical sicknesses in their bodies. We're designed to be conscious. We're designed to have our chakras open. We're designed to have a healthy body. One of the ways I explain it in an intensive is like this. We live in duality. I no longer live in duality, but most people do. And often the question is, what is duality? And I got this word, this English word, which you'll be very familiar with, individuality. So I twist it, in divided duality. Even my translators can do this now. In divided duality. So the divide is here we have physical and mortal, the body, what we see. And here we have metaphysical and immortal. Metaphysical includes your mental and emotional body. So metaphysical, immortal. Successful people, and the way that doesn't work, put at least 94% of their energy into the physical and mortal. And maybe, and I'm being hugely generous, maybe 6% into the metaphysical and immortal. Yeah. I balance them. I live the physical and the metaphysical equally, so I've taken the divide out of the dualities. So I no longer live in the duality.
No, here is the term non-duality.
So I live in non-duality.
Yeah. And does this non-duality have any, how do you call it, qualities?
You mean, can I taste it?
Yeah, can you... People say, I can only point to it, but can I experience it? Can I feel it?
Of course people can experience it, otherwise what would I be doing as a teacher? The whole idea of the teacher, I say to people, what I am, you can become.
Yeah.
I don't, say that I'm anything particularly special, but on the other hand, I'm certainly not normal. And normal, as I say, it's a death sentence today. You don't want to be normal. When your kids say, what's wrong with you, Dad? You're not normal. You say to them, oh, say it again. That's lovely. Say it again. I'm not normal. So, it has qualities. It has the quality of well-being in a way that you can't imagine. It has a quality of certainty in a way that nobody would comprehend. It has a quality of clarity, of absolute clarity. A lot of people say, what is my purpose? You have a sense of purpose beyond anything that you could imagine, in as much as there is no purpose at all. The purpose of being is enough. The purpose of love is enough. We have one human energy. You could put all, as you know, in quantum physics, you could put all humanity in if you were to take the space out of every atom in every human, then you could put all humanity in the size of a sugar cube. So there's one humanity. The way I live my life, the way Eckhart Tolle lives his, and people of that caliber, of which there are many, the way they live their life affects all humanity. Not that they're going to come up and say thank you, but it affects all humanity.
You said once before that you were reluctant to get out and say, hey, I'm Michael and I have this beautiful thing to share. You didn't give much publicity to your talks.
That's true. For about 15 years, I was a reluctant spiritual teacher.
How come?
Because I didn't have the love.
The love for?
Humanity. Not that I have today. I mean, many people are what I call good people. I wasn't interested in being good or bad. I just wanted to be me. And to be me, truthfully to be me in that time, I would have stayed at home on my bit of land, and I would have grown fruit trees. I would have sold where I was. I would have had 5 acres. I'd have fruit trees. I'd be completely self-sufficient. And I'd say, it's fine, the world can get on with it. But one time something happened. A little being said to me, if there were no flowers, if there were no bees pollinating the flowers, what would happen? I said, well, there would be no flowers. And this being said, would that be perfect? I said, yes, it would be perfect, but I got the point. The point is, I like flowers. And so it's more perfect to have bees. And so the message to me was, then go and pollinate the human flowers with truth and with love. I could pollinate them with truth, but I hadn't got the love aspect. And then when I had this extraordinary experience of unconditional love, and something I did in one moment that was an act of complete unconditional love, then I realized I will stay with this forever. And in that moment it transformed me again, and I became the person I am today. In a way, I'm glad the earlier years I wasn't known, because I was a very, very different person. And when a leopard has spots, you can't change them. And so the world didn't get to know me as a leopard with spots. They know me the person I am today. The person I am today is the one who's becoming much more known. Yeah. And that's good. So everything works perfectly if you can see the perfection. And so I've been in no hurry. I'm going to live a long time. And I think when I'm, well over 100, people come, I've got to go and listen to this guy. He's way over 100 and they reckon he looks like a 70-year-old. I've got to see this for myself. Maybe I'm dreaming, but I suspect not.
And you still talk about yourself as a person. In some Advaita circles, that is, there's no such thing as a person.
I've never studied any of that.
No.
So if you were to talk about that to me, I don't know. I'm a simple guy who looks at life in a simple way. To me, the greatest truths are the simplest. I'm a magnificent, metaphysical, multidimensional, immortal being of love and light, and so are you. We call that a person. That will do me.
Yeah. But is the person talking about dividing? Then there are more persons. Then you are a person, I'm a person, there are persons.
There's one person.
One person.
Yeah, and then there's only, in the end, there's not one person, there's one universe. And the person is the universe. But you've got to get past personality to realize that you're not just a person.
Yeah.
It's back to individuality, back to divided duality, back to the one in the all. Many feel that, but not so many feel the all in the one. And then fewer feel the all in the all.
So am I talking to myself right now?
I'll let you decide that. But yes, in a way you are. In a way, everybody you talk to, it's one of the things I say to everybody you meet, everybody who's unpleasant to you, you're looking at the part that treats you unpleasantly. And when you treat yourself with reverence and love and deep respect, you'll find that people around you, the people that come into your orbit of life, have that same attitude and same energy. Very much works that way. But you see, On the other hand, I can't put into an interview what I put into my intensives, so I won't try to get too deep in this.
My pleasure. Could we call each other mirrors? Do you reflect to me what I'm carrying?
The mirror analogy is a good one, but it goes beyond the mirror. The simple fact is there is only one humanity. The simple fact is there is nothing outside self. The self you are, there is nothing outside of you. When you look out there, what you see is an illusion created by mass mind and held by subconsciousness. We have a choice. Now the mass lives subconsciously. Bruce Lipton, the famous biologist, said that 94% of humanity lives subconsciously. I would like to chat with Bruce one day because he's right as regards to that. But we're not designed to live subconsciously. Everything in nature lives consciously. Everything. And so we are a conscious design, but long, long ago we slipped slowly into the morass of the subconscious. The subconscious doesn't come up with newness, it comes up with cleverness. And so we've become more intellectual and more clever, but our clever allows us to pollute all the rivers. 100 years ago you could drink from most rivers and you'd be safe. Maybe not the Thames and some of the city rivers, but in the country today you couldn't do that. They tell me in 2050 the oceans will be pretty much dead, and clever allows for all that. Clever allows for technology that we've created, that if a meteorite went by and wiped out the silicon chip, we would be in big trouble. Or if, shall we say, the poles and North and South Pole reverse polarity, we have no electricity. The Kalahari Bushman would say, did something happen? But the rest of humanity would be running around screaming and dying by the millions because we put ourselves out on a technological limb. What you have pointing at me, do you know how it works? Could you recreate it? Could you make that? Because I couldn't. I mean, I wouldn't even know how my car works anymore. It's a computer on 4 wheels. Once upon a time I actually knew how it worked. Yeah. Now it's left me completely behind. And so we've created a technology that only very few of us have a clue how it works. And in other words, we've put our reliance outside of ourselves. We've created reliance outside of ourselves. In the Paleolithic times, we were self-reliant. And in the Paleolithic times, our pineal was as big as a small bird's egg, as small as the last joint of your little finger. Today, with the loss of self-reliance, and we even gave our spirituality away to religion. So we did that second hand. Today, overall, our pineal, and there are many differences, many who don't have this, the pineal has shrunk to the size of a grain of rice. And as it gets smaller, they're now finding in dementia cases when they die, the pineal is atrophied. There's no energy in it. And we have a new case of dementia now every 7 seconds. Every 7 seconds in the Western world there's a new case of dementia. In the third world countries, nobody's counting. It's very much in the Western world. A new dementia every 7 seconds. We have a new diagnosis of cancer every 1 minute. We have a death from cancer every 3.5 minutes. Medical science tells us it will get twice as bad in the next 20 years. This is all down to clever and intellect. Nobody's to blame. Nobody's to blame.
Nobody's to blame someone.
Nobody, exactly. You see, there's another game we play, blame. I'll tell you the truth. And if you keep it in your life, it'll steer you in a good way. In every moment of your life, you are creating the content and the direction of every moment of your life. And it never ends. Absolutely never ends. 40,000 plus sicknesses and diseases we have. Where did they come from? Out of the human consciousness. They're the manifestations of about 40 plus thousand different types of discord, worry, anxiety, rage, anger, and on and on and on. Rabbits are not very creative. They come up with about 20.
Yeah. So that mechanism of blaming, I've always said, well, that's the capitalistic society which makes me miserable because it tells me I have to have this watch, that kind of shoes, that car.
But you see, you only play the game. You go along with it. Like if you want to buy a pair of trousers now, you've got to basically buy the fashionable trousers, because that's the ones they sell. So that, I just go along with that. There's nothing you can do about that.
But it doesn't make you complete.
It doesn't make any difference to me.
No, it doesn't add anything to your sense of self.
No, absolutely not. My sense of self is, I honestly feel I am the universe. I can sit down and, if I choose to, and listen to the galaxy. I can listen to the universe. And I don't do that a lot, but it doesn't communicate. Hi Michael, how are you today? It doesn't communicate like that. There is an energy coming that is of vastness and eternity. And you can get lost in that. We finished an intensive in England, and I'd been taking people through a guided exercise. And at the end, I'd gone in very deeply because of no translation, and I'd gone in very deeply. And I found myself, not as Michael, but as a being approaching eternity. And suddenly I was beyond the universe, beyond this universe. The Pleiadians consider there are about 490 billion universes. So ours is just one of them. And I was somewhere else completely, and the experience was so vast, my emotional body overloaded. I couldn't emotionally handle it. And I considered I'm pretty balanced, but that was way overload. And I began to cry. And I left the room, because we only had 10 minutes to the end. And I left the room, and I walked upstairs, and I walked into her, and I was crying deeply because the emotional overload of connecting with something not more vast than I am, but a glimpse of the vastness that I am, that you are, that he is, that Carolyn is, the vastness of what we actually are. And I realised, wow, I might need to make a move up into grade 6 before I can handle that. But it was wonderful. And occasionally outdoors, I will sit and touch on the periphery of that. This time I went a bit beyond the periphery. So the universe, when it communicates with you, it doesn't do it telepathically or with anything. It's an allness. We don't have a language that describes that.
Now, let's see if we can come up with an example that places this concept on the ground in everyday life. Once again, let's use a common experience. Fear. All fear, and that which derives from it, such as anger, hatred, and violence, is a distorted form of love. That's an important statement. You should listen to it again. I said, all fear, and that which derives from it, such as anger, hatred, and violence, is a distorted form of love. If you think about it, you'll realize that if a person loved nothing, that person would be totally free of anger, fear, hatred, or violence, because there would be no need for such emotions to arise, nor the actions that proceed from them. Exploring this further, we see that fear, anger, hatred, and violence are expressions of the loss, or the anticipated loss, of something which is loved, or of never having to begin with something which is loved. But if there's no love of anything, there's no loss or deprivation, and therefore no negative emotion of any kind attached to the absence of anything. Can you see this? Do you see how this is true? Because humans, in their limited perspective, misunderstand how to express their love. They behave in ways that appear to be the opposite of love, but which are, in fact, distorted wailings of love. All expressions of anger and fear, hatred and violence, are distorted wailings of love. Remember that. For the rest of your life, remember that.
Let's talk about love. It is one, of course, of the nicest things to talk about, and yet it is also one that is greatly misunderstood and full of so many distortions. So let's start with the basics. If somebody is just, wanting to know what is love, how would you describe it from the perspective of the consciousness system and MBT?
Well, within
within my big toe, or MBT, I give a technical definition for love, but that won't mean too much to your audience unless they've read the books, and that is that love is the nature of a low-entropy consciousness. So that will tell us that love is really integral and fundamental with consciousness. It's part of consciousness. Now, another way, a more practical way of looking at love is about other, as opposed to being about self. Love is caring, it's cooperation, it's compassion, it's all those things where other is more important really than self. That's love. And it only takes one to love. Things in relationship like. Like is an earned thing. If somebody likes you, it's because you've earned to be liked because of the way you've interacted with them. If somebody trusts you, it's because you've earned their trust in the way you've interacted with them. But love is not necessarily earned. Love is given. It's given away. So it only takes one to love. It may take two to like and two to trust because that's a relationship thing. But love is not really a relationship thing. It's not a give and take. It's not I'll love you if you love me. That's a condition, you see. And that's not love. That's something else. So we hear the word unconditional love. Well, that's the only kind of love there is. If it's not unconditional, it's not love. It's something else. Most of us confuse the word love, particularly when we're young, with need. We fall in need a lot more than we fall in love. That means, that the other person, the object of our love, is a person that meets our needs. They connect with us. They give us the kind of things we want. And in turn, we give them some of what they want. And if we meet each other's needs, then we mistake that for being in love. That's really not what love is. That's a conditional thing. I'll meet your needs if you meet my needs. Well, the problem with that is that our needs continually change. Our needs at, 16 are totally different than our needs at 36, which are totally different than our needs at 46, and so on. It's just different. So as we change and our needs change, this agreement, I'll do yours if you do mine, kind of a negotiation, starts to often, come unglued in that the needs have changed. What we expect is different. What we want is different. And relationships become problematical then. And then, what they often end up being is, let's just be friends. Let's learn to get along and not annoy each other. And then that's better than being alone. You see, now that's a deal. We've kind of settled for something that is comfortable. But again, let's not confuse that with love. That's not love. That's an arrangement. Just like if it's all about needs, it's a deal. It's a negotiated, relationship. You can almost think of it as a contract. These are the things I need you to do for me, and the way I need you to be for me, and here's the way you need me to be for you. And if we can manage that, then we can pretend that we're really happy. But that's not where happiness comes from. Happiness comes from what you give, not from what you get. So that's why I say love is about other. It's about what can you give? What can you do to be of service, of value to another person? How can you help that person? And if that's foremost in your mind, in your relationship with that person, then that's describing love. It's about other. If it's, what can you do for me? How can you make me feel good? How can you support me? How can you do the things that I need you to do? Then that's not love. That's needs. So, in kind of a very practical sense, that's the differentiation between, love and need, between something that you give unconditionally. You just give it, as opposed to a deal that you make for making sure that you get, as much as you give, if not a little more. So, these are ways that we confuse what's love and what's not. Now, it turns out that love is the reason we're here. Love is the key to what we're supposed to be doing in this virtual reality that we call our physical universe. As it turns out, if you look at consciousness, consciousness is an information system. Well, that makes sense. What is our consciousness? What is our awareness aware of? Well, it's just information, right? It's the information we get through our senses. That defines our reality. So reality is information. Consciousness is an information system. An information system that is broken up into many different individuated units of consciousness. Well, that makes it a social system. So if you have a lot of these individuated units of consciousness and they are interacting with each other, and if it's an information system, that means they pass information back and forth. You see, that's what they do. Now, how do you optimize that system? How do you grow that system? How do you evolve that system? Well, if it's a system made up of individuals interacting, the way you optimize it and grow it is by cooperating, by sharing, by caring. You see, these are the things that build the system. How do you tear it apart? How do you make it not optimized? Well, that has to do with it's all about me. You see, it's what I need, what I want. I got to get what, as much as I can, and then I have to figure out a way to keep it so that nobody takes it away from me. Well, that kind of relationship is based on fear. It's the fear of, I need to get mine. I'm important. I'm at the center. Everybody else out there is basically somebody that I have to interact with, somebody I can use, or somebody that can use me. It's that kind of a me against the world viewpoint of life. And that's very destructive. That doesn't build. That is not, something that evolves in a positive direction. That de-evolves. It just gets worse and worse. If you have a bunch of people who are all out for themselves, well, they will eventually group up into various groups for self-protection, right? You protect me and I'll protect you, and now we'll be the two of us. Now we're tougher as two of us. Well, eventually you have different groups then, and now these groups struggle with each other. Well, it kind of sounds like where we live, right? We have nation states, we have groups. They've all kind of grouped up for their mutual protection. It's the old system where the ruler had the castle, and the castle was to protect those people. And of course, the ruler on the next hill, he also has his castle. And what the rulers want to do is take each other's territory away from them because they want more stuff for them. More riches, more whatever, more territory, more power, more people. And that doesn't end in a good place. And we're not all that different from that today. We're organized a little differently, but we're still mostly based on fear. That's what motivates us in most of the things we do. Most of our emotions, most of our feelings are fear-based. And to evolve consciousness, we need to cooperate. We need to care. We need to work together rather than how much can I get, and how can I keep it. It's how much can I give? How much can I help? Where can I add to everyone's solution? That's love. So love is about giving. It's about caring. It's given away for free. It's not a deal. It's not, I'll do this if you do that. It's not a negotiation. And the opposite of love is fear. And fear is all about self. If you can think of any fear, well, fear is about you. The fear is the fear for you. And we sometimes confuse that with say, well, I'm afraid for others. I'm afraid my children won't grow up. And we have that sort of thing. But that's really our own fear, and it's really about us. You see, it's not really about the children. It's about us. We feel that we want our children to be a certain way. It's our want, our need for them to be the way we want them to be. And that's our fear. It's not really that the children create the fear in us. We create the fear in ourselves. The children is just one of those areas that we project our fear into. So that's kind of the difference. I'm trying to make a kind of a stark comparison between, what is love, to answer your question. The opposite of that is what is fear. And if you see those in counterpoint with each other, then it makes it a little clearer that fear is about you. And when you are around other people, and if you watch yourself, if you are an observer of people, and better yet, an observer of yourself, you will notice very different ways of being for the people who are mostly about love and those who are mostly about fear. The people who are mostly about fear tend to start most of their sentences with I, because it's about them. There's a lot of I sentences out there, and they tend to be unhappy. They tend to complain, find problems with. They see the faults in others very easily. They know how things should be done. They know what's right, and it annoys them that other people don't know. So, of course, they feel the need to tell them. It's that sort of thing. So it's somebody who has a sense of arrogance, I would say. That's that I know and you don't. That's an arrogant sort of thing. And they are constantly negative. If they're talking about people, it's what's wrong with those people. If they're talking about politics, it's what's wrong with politics. If they're talking about the world, it's what's wrong with the world. If they're talking about their job, it's what's wrong with their job. If they're talking about just their everyday, business, it's what's wrong with their health. Everything is seen from a negative viewpoint. And we know lots of people like that, and most of us are like that ourselves, a lot of the time. What's wrong and what isn't right and what annoys us is all we can focus on. Well, that's somebody who's lost in fear. People who are love-based see the positive things in everything. If they talk about, their health, they don't talk about the ache and pain. They talk about how nice it is to be alive today. The sun is shining or the rain is falling, whatever it is, it's wonderful. It's nice. It's just good to be here in a very positive sense. If they talk about politics or the world or any of the rest of that stuff, they talk about what's nice, what's good about it, because that's what they see in it. You see? Yes, it's not that these people are weak-minded and don't understand that there's a lot of negative things going on. They do. But dwelling on it and bringing it up and making that be the subject of your attention is just dysfunctional. It doesn't take you anyplace good. Let's all sit around and talk about what's wrong with other people. It doesn't take you anywhere useful. Whereas you kind of look at what's right with the world, what's going on that's positive, then that helps. That helps bring up the people around you. Everybody feels better if it's that kind of a conversation rather than a complaining conversation. So just look around next time you're in a social group or with people, or look at yourself, and are you the one who is, being negative? Or, do you notice other people being that way? Do you notice anybody being positive? Well, most of us would have a hard time pointing out the people who are continually positive, who aren't complaining most of the time. That's not the majority. The majority are going to be talking about what's wrong with things. And there'll be only a few people that you'll find that will mostly talk about what's right with things. And you might say, well, yeah, but in our world, most everything's wrong. That's just being a realist. No, that's not really being a realist. That's being negative. There are things in your life that are good. You just don't notice them. There are people who care about you. There are people you care about. There are things happening every day that are good things. We just don't pay a lot of attention to them because we're focused on bad things. For everybody that gets, mugged in a park, there's somebody else who gets some kind of gratuitous gift from someone else. That's a really nice thing. And it happens a lot. It's not that good is hardly ever around and that evil is everywhere. We see it that way, But it's really not the case. And besides that, we have the ability to change that. We can do something good. You see, we can give to somebody. And you'll find if you grow toward love rather than fear, that the thing that really makes you happy is doing something for somebody else. It's being of value. It's caring. And when you're able to reach out and help someone, then you feel good about that. That makes you smile. I mean, really help someone, not just tell somebody how to do it right because you know and they don't. That's not what I mean. But actually help someone. Give somebody something. You know, that's good, and it feels real good. So the nice thing is that when you're positive and you are growing toward love, your life tends to be mostly joy, peace. You feel satisfaction, happiness. All those things are a byproduct of growing toward love. And if your life isn't that way, it's because you're mostly dominated by fear. If your life is a struggle, if it's hard, if you're constantly trying to, get somewhere and you can't quite seem to get there, you're frustrated, you have anxiety, you're worried about how things are going to work out and how's this going to go and what does that mean and, are the kids going to be all right and am I going to get that promotion, and you just constantly have all of this stuff going on, you're struggling. Every day is a struggle. That means you're based on fear. That means you're living through ego and belief. So, for the most part, now we don't control everything, but for the most part, a life that is love-based is a life that's full of joy. It's a great life. That's why those people are positive. They really see their life as a joy. For people who are fear-based, their life is a struggle. They're constantly having to struggle, they feel, just to keep their nose above the waterline. It's a constant struggle. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. No matter what, whether it's dealing with your family, with your friends, with your work, with the outside world, everything looks unhappy. Everything looks miserable. Everything looks like it's just too hard to do. Will we ever live in peace? Will we ever get along with each other? Is this happening? And we just go on and on and on. Well, that's because we're fear-based. We see the glass is always half empty. You look around, look at yourself and look at other people, and you can see these two dynamics, the fear versus love dynamics working in the world every day with the people you're around, the people at work, your children, your spouse. All of this is real obvious if you just look and kind of know what to look for. And you'll pretty much see that we're dominated by fear. That's kind of the way we are. But what we're here to do is grow toward becoming love. That's the key. That's why we exist in this virtual reality. This is a entropy reduction trainer for individuated units of consciousness, just like flight trainers are for pilots. Well, you don't want to put a new pilot in a $700 million aircraft and see if they fly it right. You put them in a trainer, right? Because that's better. They'll learn to fly in that trainer before they ever get into a real airplane. Well, that's why we're here. This is an entropy reduction trainer. This is a become love trainer, because that's how consciousness evolves. Consciousness evolves by becoming love, because it's a social system, and that's how it optimizes. That's how it evolves. So, love is at the core of us, you see. Love's not just a neat thing, to work on. Love is what we're about. That's our mission. And the neat thing about love is it's not something you have to go get. What you have to do is just get rid of the fear. If you get rid of the fear, what's left is love, you see. So it's not really that you need to get something new as it is you need to get rid of something old. It makes it easier, which then each one of us can do that. It's like this is talking about yourself, changing yourself. And that's good because you really can't change anybody else. So it's fortunate that this boils down to what it's about, is changing yourself. And in my lexicon, that I call that growing up, or decreasing your entropy, becoming love, evolving your consciousness, all those things are, it's spiritual growth. You can look at it in lots of ways, but it's a very practical thing. This is not like theory that you think about. The change has to happen at your being level. It's who you are. It's not act more caring, act more considerate, act more cooperative, act more loving. That won't get you anywhere. You got to be more cooperative, be more loving, be more caring. It has to come out of who you are, not what you act like. You see, acting is civilizing. Acting is what we do up here. We think, I should do this, I should be this way, and so on. And we run our lives out of our heads mostly, but that won't help. It'll make you more fun to be with, but you're not going to grow up if you just do that. It has to be real change. You have to become a different person to where you are that helping, caring person, not because you think you should be, but because you are. That's just who you are. That's how you relate to things. It doesn't have to come through your intellect. Okay, so now I've kind of jumped all around and kind of given a broad look at love from a couple of different directions. So where do you want to go from here?
Well, it's wonderful actually where you did take it, because you kind of went into the next three questions I was going to ask you, so this covered it wonderfully. And I think the important emphasis, Tom, really is on that aspect of getting out of our own way, not sabotaging who we are and what we are, because this is just it. Recently too, I had a conversation with Jürgen Zievek. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work. And in his work, he brings up the idea of meditation, for example, as simply letting go. And this is, what I'm hearing also in what you're sharing in that aspect of, rather than getting love, right, or, doing training to be loved, we just have to let go of the fear, let go of all the beliefs and all the limitations that are standing in our way.
Right.
And that's why, it brings a whole new perspective on when people say to each other constantly, I love you, where what's really being said is, I need you, I need you. And so we're great at those agreements, but quite a different story with regards to really being it at the being level. And
yes.
So you've definitely answered the idea of, how do we identify it, how to really be clear that this is love and, this isn't. But if anybody's still wondering, in terms of a simulation, an energy frequency, a pattern, besides the obvious that we know that, okay, it's caring, sharing, compassion, is there anything else that you'd like to mention with regards to identifying the frequency of love in and from the perspective of a simulation or virtual reality?
Well, yes, and it falls along the lines of the question. Okay, becoming love is a good thing. How do I do that? What's the process? How do I actually change myself? If it's not in the intellect and it's at the being level, how do I become a different person? I am who I am. How do I be somebody else? That's a very good question, and it's a very practical question. How do you do this? Well, the fear produces ego. Ego is a result of the fear, and I define ego as awareness in the service of fear. And that's pretty much the same thing Freud meant when he said ego. He just didn't realize that people were so bound up with fear. So he thought, well, everybody seems to have an ego, therefore it's a healthy part of a system, because here are all these everyday average people, and they all have lots of ego. Well, what he didn't notice is that these everyday people are full of fear, and they're mostly struggling, and they're not particularly happy, and they're not really successful as human beings. Even if they're successful in business and other things, they're mostly struggling. So anyway, so that's ego, and fear produces this. That ego leads into things like arrogance and dominance, and I know more, and I know how you should be. You should be this way, and we see the world from ourself being at the center of it. We're at the center of our own universe, and we see everything else in relationship to ourselves. We judge people based on how well they match us. You see how much they're like us. If they're like us, then they're really great people. If they're not like us, they do things differently than us, then, we're not sure we like them so much. So we become the center of our universe, and we interact just based on our needs, our wants, the way we are, our knowledge, and that's one of the things that fear does. Another thing that fear does is it creates beliefs. Because if you have uncertainty makes most people nervous. They don't like to be uncertain. They don't like to not know what the answer is. They like to have certainty. Yes, it will be this way. Yes, you will be that way. You see, and when we don't have certainty, which we almost never do, then we come up with beliefs. We believe it is the way that makes us feel good, the way it makes us feel better. Well, the problem with a belief is that once you believe something, you no longer are open to seeing it any other way. Therefore, you reject those facts and that experience that is contrary to your belief. You just toss it out as just throw it away. You deny it, basically. So that's the problem with belief, is it always keeps you blindsided. It's a trap from which you can't see, but just the selective certain things that you want to see. So fear creates this ego and beliefs. Now the fear is very hard to find. If I asked an individual, tell me all the things, in you that are fearful. What are all your fears? They would probably list one or two, and many people would say, well, I don't have any. Because the fear is subtle. You see, the fear is inside you. It's a part of your reality. It's the way you see the world. It's not an intellectual thing. It's fear at your being level. And it's the same with belief. If I asked you to tell me, what are all your beliefs? You might tell me one or two, but there's a whole lot more that you just picked up out of our culture. You picked up from, your family, from your friends, from just being here in this culture. And if you were in some other culture, your beliefs would be different. You'd have some other set of beliefs. And those things are hard to see because they're just in your mind. It's just truth. It's the way life is. You see, so you don't see it as a belief, even though that's what it is. So those two are really hard to get a hold of. But now that ego is really easy to spot. That's not hard at all. So that's where we start. If you want to change yourself and become love, start looking at your ego. Now, how are you going to find ego? Anytime you feel negative, which means anxious, upset, angry, agitated, annoyed, we can go on and on and on with this list of things that are basically we're not feeling good, we're feeling negative about something. And when you feel negative, you have these negative feelings about what's going on or what's happening or what somebody just said to you or that sort of thing, because you feel negative, that's ego. If you didn't have the ego, you wouldn't feel negative. You see, you feel negative because it's about you. If it was somebody else said something, you'd say, well, that's about them. Somebody else said something rude. If you have no fear, if you don't have that ego, that doesn't make you angry because it's not really about you. It's about them. They chose to say that, you see. You choose to be angry about it when you hear it. It's your choice. So anytime you feel something negative, and most of us go through life feeling a whole lot more negative things than we do positive things because we're mostly programmed and run by our fear. So when you feel something negative like that, just trace it back and say, where does that negative feeling come from? Why is it like that? Okay, they said that. That made me angry. That's negative. Why did I get angry at that? Well, I'm angry at that because they don't understand me. They don't appreciate me. They don't know all the good things I've been doing. I got that rude comment or something. They just don't appreciate me, and they're arrogant, and they're this, and they're that. Well, really, it's all about you. It's because they're not giving you the due and the respect and the praise or the whatever that you feel you're worth and that you should get. And because of that, you get angry. It's not really about them, you see. It's not that they make you angry. You choose to be angry. And you choose to be angry because you have fear. Because you're not getting what you want. What I want. I'm not getting what I want. Well, it's all about you and what you want. Remember, fear is about you. Ego is about you, not about other. Otherwise, if it was about other, you'd say, oh, this other person, really feeling negative or upset or something, I wonder why they're like that. What can I do to help them feel better? You see, rather than getting angry with what they're saying, you try to think, where could you help? How could you, maybe it's a misunderstanding, or maybe they just don't see something, or maybe it's the way you've been acting that creates that reaction in them. And, you'd be looking at what could you do to make that person feel better? Maybe you could just walk up and give them a hug, right while they're saying something mean about you, just give them a hug and say something nice to them. That would probably stop right there. You see? So there's a different response. So anyway, you feel negative. Any little trivial thing that you feel negative, that relates to a fear. There you go. Find the fear. The fear is not being respected, not being given your due, not being appreciated. Then you say, well, how come that's such a big deal to me that I don't get appreciated? Why is that I get so upset because this person thinks badly of me when I'm really not bad at all? Well, and you'll get to a fear like being inadequate, not being lovable, not being competent. You get down to some of these basic fears that you have inside of you. Well, at that point, you've just found the fear. Because if somebody just asked you, well, what are your fears? You wouldn't say, well, I have a fear of, being inadequate and, I'm insecure. And you might not say that. But if you follow the ego back, you'll see that that's where it is. Now you have to, the next step, so that's how you find the fear. You find it by tracing ego back. You find ego by experiencing and feeling something negative. Okay? Now you found the fear. What are you going to do next? The next thing, you have to own that fear. You can say, okay, that's me. I feel inadequate. And when somebody says something about me not being adequate, it just pushes my button because that's where my fear is. So if they even insinuate just a little bit that I'm not quite adequate or I haven't done it well, I get upset because my fear is being inadequate. So own it and say, all right, I'm like that. That's the way I feel about myself, that I'm really not that adequate, and I'm afraid that people will see that. So I try to cover that up. And I don't want anybody else to see it, and I don't want anybody to mention it. So you have to own it and say, I am that way, and I really don't want to be that way. Why should I feel inadequate? That isn't helpful. It doesn't make life better for me. It doesn't give me any advantages. It's only disadvantages. So I don't want to feel that way. Now you have to use your intent and your focus to not feel that way. Well, that's hard. But whenever you do feel that way, you catch yourself. You see, and when you catch yourself getting angry at a comment that belittles you a little bit or doesn't at least appreciate you for the magnificent person that you are, if you hear that and you feel yourself getting a little upset, just say, oh, no, not going there. Not going to feel that. Change the tune and do something positive. Say something positive right then. You see, rather than feel hurt. Say something positive to that person or to anyone else that's around. So that's how you deal with it. And eventually, when you keep catching yourself and not going there, that fear will start to dissipate. Because what you'll find is none of these fears are anything more than smoke. You see, they're just feelings. They're just ideas in your head. And once you own them and then ignore them and put them aside, they just disappear. Because there really wasn't anything there anyway. They're all paper tigers. And you don't know that. You feel like it's a real tiger. You really are inadequate. And everybody will know it if you don't work hard to cover it up. So you think it's a real tiger, but it isn't. Say, well, if that's the way I am, I'll just be me. I'll be who I am. That's being authentic. I'm going to live in the moment. I'm going to interact with people, and I'll be who I am. But pay attention to who you are. And if you're negative, if you get hurt easily, if you get angry, if you have all these negative feelings, then own it and change it. And now you're going to try to be different. Okay? I am being honest. That honesty brings out these feelings and interactions. Now I need to deal with those in a way that's positive. I need to get rid of the fear. Easy to say, much, much harder to do. But you'll find that Pick a fear that's not the hardest one for you. Pick a fear that's maybe more in your minor fear category. Work on that first. The first one you conquer is the easiest one. Because when you finally outgrow that fear, you will feel lighter. It's like somebody just took weights off of you. Everything. You will walk differently. You will, look differently. You'll comb your hair differently. You'll just be a different person. You'll feel so much better. And, that'll show. And you'll like it. And that'll give you a lot of incentive to get the next one. And tear it out by the roots as well. So the first one's the tough one. But it does work. And I've known any number of people, particularly young males, come up with the idea of, I don't have any fears. I don't, I'm not afraid of anything. I don't really have any fears. As far as I know, I don't have any ego either. And this sort of thing. And it's because they've never actually looked for it. But after we've had a talk and about 4 or 5 months go by, I hear from them. And the next thing I hear is, oh my God, I'm full of fear. Everything I do is because of fear. Where do I start? I didn't realize that my whole life was dominated by fear. Once they can find it, they realize it's everywhere. And then it's just a matter, don't get overwhelmed. Just pick one and start working on it. But in, 6 months to a year, you can have a whole different life. And you'll be a different person. It's not like it takes 10 years to do this. But if you're really serious and work hard at it, in a year, you'll be a different person. And you'll be happy. And your life will be full of joy, and it'll be good. And you know what? All your relationships will get better. All those people that it was because of them, is why you're unhappy. It's the way they are. They all get better too. It just, everything in your life gets better. And it turns out that most of what you were finding negative in them is your own interpretation. It's your own fear that made things negative. So, anyway, that's the way to go about it. You have to find the fear, and you have to work on getting rid of it, and the only antidote to fear is courage. It takes courage to do that, because you know that if you're just honest and be yourself, nobody will like you. You won't do well at work. You have to constantly be hustling, constantly putting up an image, constantly worrying about how you look. And that's why you succeed. If you were just yourself, no, that wouldn't do. Well, that has to do. You have to be yourself. Otherwise, you're living out of your head, not out of your being level. You're acting, not being. And if you're acting, you are avoiding the fear, basically. Not dealing with it, which means you can't get to there from here. You can't get to the fearless love state if you're acting, because you won't see what the problems are. So you have to be real, and you have to understand you're not perfect, and you have to be willing to accept that, and then you have to be willing to grow. And another thing to practice, so that's one thing. Another thing to practice is observe. Observe yourself. Observe other people. Try to understand where other people are coming from. Try to understand another person's reality, particularly a person who gets under your skin. And for most of us, where the rubber meets the road, where our ego flares its worst, is in our relationships. Mostly with that significant other, because that's where we're really close. That's where we're tied very closely. But with our relatives, with our coworkers, our boss, the people that we have relationships with. And the deeper the relationship, the more ego, gets in the way. So that's where to look. Look at those relationships and realize that it's not true that somebody else makes you angry. You choose to be angry. You choose to be upset. That's your choice. And that choice is based on your fear. That's why you're making it. And it's a bad choice. Don't choose to be angry. Choose to be happy. Choose to be full of joy. And in the beginning, it's like, well, I can't. It just makes me angry. I can't choose, to be happy about this. But that's you. It's not them. It's not that they make you angry. You are choosing that. You make yourself that way because of your fear. So that's kind of how to deal with it. Not easy. I know it's a very hard thing to do, but it does work if you keep after it, and you will be a different person. Most of the misery we have in life is self-created.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this puts a whole new perspective also on this idea of, again, seeking, the solutions outside of ourselves and always thinking the problems are outside of ourselves, when really it is so much within us. And we have that, as you kept beautifully pointing out, it's the choice, because I hear so often, but I can't help myself. I can't help but worry, but stress, but be in fear, but ... right? But you're showing us and empowering and showing really the idea of it's choices. It's all about the choices we make. But observation, of course, is key, and humility is key, right? Not thinking, yes, we have no ego, we have no fear, it's all great. Not at all. And this makes me think, Tom, of in book 3 of my Big Toe trilogy, you talk about the struggles that we face as humans, and you really pointed at them, many of them here. And you also emphasize there, one of which is a struggle of fear and ignorance. And that's really what it comes down to, the big themes of fear and ignorance against love and understanding. And so that's a big part of this entire...
When you die, you're not going to have to put up with everlasting non-existence, because that's not an experience. A lot of people are afraid that when they die, they're going to be locked up in a dark room forever. And sort of undergo that. But one of the most interesting things in the world, this is a yoga, this is a way of realization. Try and imagine what it will be like to go to sleep and never wake up. Think about that. Children think about it. It's one of the great wonders of life. What will it be like to go to sleep and never wake up? And if you think long enough about that, something will happen to you. You will find out, among other things, that it'll pose the next question to you. What was it like to wake up after having never gone to sleep? That was when you were born. You see, you can't have an experience of nothing. Nature abhors a vacuum. So after you're dead, the only thing that can happen is the same experience, or the same sort of experience as when you were born. In other words, we all know very well that after people die, other people are born. And they're all you. Only you can only experience it one at a time. Everybody is I. You all know you are you. And wheresoever beings exist throughout all galaxies, it doesn't make any difference. You are all of them. And when they come into being, that's you coming into being. You know that very well. Only you don't have to remember the past. In the same way, you don't have to think about how you work your thyroid gland, or whatever else it is in your organism. You don't have to know how to shine the sun. You just do it. Like you breathe. Doesn't it really astonish you that you are this fantastically complex thing? And that you're doing all of this and you never had any education in how to do it? Never learned, but you're this miracle? Well, the point is that from a strictly physical, scientific standpoint, this organism is a continuous energy with everything else that's going on. And if I am my foot, I am the sun. Only we've got this little partial view, we've got the idea that no, I'm just something in this body. The ego. That's a joke. The ego is nothing other than the focus of conscious attention. It's like a radar on a ship. The radar on a ship is a troubleshooter. Is there anything in the way? And conscious attention is a designed function of the brain to scan the environment, like a radar does, and note for any trouble-making changes. But if you identify yourself with your troubleshooter, then naturally you define yourself as being in a perpetual state of anxiety. And the moment we cease to identify with the ego and become aware that we are the whole organism, you realize that as a first thing how harmonious it all is. Because your organism is a miracle of harmony. All this thing functioning together. Even those corpuscles and creatures that are fighting each other in the bloodstream and eating each other up, if they weren't doing that, you wouldn't be healthy. So what is discord at one level of your being is harmony at a higher level. And you begin to realize that, and you begin to be aware too that the discords of your life and the discords of people's life, which are a fight at one level, at a higher level of the universe, are healthy and harmonious. And you suddenly realize that everything that you are and do is at that level as magnificent and as free of any blemish as the patterns in waves, the markings in marble, the way a cat moves, and that this world is really okay and can't be anything else, because otherwise it couldn't exist. But the reality underneath physical existence, or which really is physical existence, because in my philosophy there's no difference between the physical and the spiritual. These are absolutely out-of-date categories. It's all process. It isn't stuff on the one hand and form on the other. It is pattern. Life is pattern. It is a dance of energy. So I will never invoke spooky knowledge. That is to say that I've had a private revelation, or that I have sensory vibrations going on a plane which you don't have. Everything is standing right out in the open. It's just a question of how you look at it. So you do discover, when you realize this, the most extraordinary thing to me that I never cease to be flabbergasted at whenever it happens to me. Some people will use a symbolism of the relationship of God to the universe, wherein God is, say, brilliant light, only somehow veiled, hiding underneath all these forms that you see as you look around you. So far, so good. But the truth is funnier than that. It is that you are looking right at the brilliant light now, that the experience you are having, which you call ordinary everyday consciousness, pretending you're not it, that experience is exactly the same thing as it. There's no difference at all. And when you find that out, you laugh yourself silly. That's the great discovery. In other words, when you really start to see things, and you look at an old paper cup, and you go into the nature of what it is to see, what vision is, or what smell is, or what touch is, you realize that that vision of the paper cup is the brilliant light of the cosmos. Nothing could be brighter. 10,000 suns couldn't be brighter. Only they're hidden in the sense that all the points of the infinite light are so tiny when you see them in the cup. They don't blow your eyes out. But it is actually, see, the source of all light is in the eye. If there were no eyes in this world, the sun would not be light. You evoke light out of the universe. In the same way, you, by virtue of having a soft skin, evoke hardness out of wood. Wood is only hard in relation to a soft skin. It's your eardrum that evokes noise out of the air. You, by being this organism, call into being the whole universe of light and color and hardness and heaviness and everything. You see? But in the mythology that we've sold ourselves on during the end of the 19th century, when people discovered how big the universe was, and that we live on a little planet in the solar system on the edge of a galaxy, which is a minor galaxy, everybody thought, we're really unimportant after all. God isn't there and doesn't love us, and nature doesn't give a damn. And we put ourselves down, you see. But actually, it's this little funny microbe, tiny thing, crawling on this little planet, that's way out somewhere, who has the ingenuity, by nature of this magnificent organic structure, to evoke the whole universe out of what would otherwise be mere quanta. There's jazz going on. But But you see, this little ingenious organism is not merely some stranger in this. This little organism on this little planet is what the whole show is growing there, and so realizing its own presence. Well, now here's the problem. If this is the state of affairs, which is so, and if the consciousness state you're in at this moment is the same thing as what we might call the divine state, if you do anything to make it different, it shows you don't understand that it's so. So the moment you start practicing yoga, or praying, or meditating, or indulging in some sort of spiritual cultivation, you are getting in your own way. The Buddha said, we suffer because we desire. If you can give up desire, you won't suffer. But he didn't say that as the last word. He said that as the opening step of a dialogue. Because if you say that to someone, they're going to come back after a while and say, yes, but I'm now desiring not to desire. And so the Buddha will answer, well, at last you're beginning to understand the point. Because you can't give up desire. Why would you try to do that? It's already desire. So in the same way, you say, you ought to be unselfish, or to give up your ego. Let go, relax. Why do you want to do that? Just because it's another way of beating the game, isn't it? But the moment you see you hypothesize that you are different from the universe, you want to get one up on it. But if you try to get one up on the universe, and you're in competition with it, it means you don't understand you are it. You think there's a real difference between self and other. But self, what you call yourself, and what you call other, are mutually necessary to each other, like back and front. They're really one. But just as a magnet polarizes itself in north and south, but it's all one magnet, so experience polarizes itself as self and other, but it's all one. So if you try to make the North Pole get the mastery of it, or the South Pole get the mastery of the North Pole, you show you don't know what's going on. A guru or teacher who wants to get this across to somebody, because he knows it himself, and when you know it, you like others to see it too. So what he does is he gets you into being ridiculous harder and more assiduously than usual. In other words, if you are in a contest with the universe, he's going to stir up that contest until it becomes ridiculous. And so he sets you such tasks as saying, now of course, in order to be a true person, you must give up yourself. Be unselfish. So the Lord steps down out of heaven and says, the first and great commandment is, thou shalt love the Lord thy God. You must love me. Well, that's a double bind. You can't love on purpose. You can't be sincere purposely. It's like trying not to think of a green elephant while taking medicine. But if a person really tries to do it, so, this is where Christianity is rigged, you should be very sorry for your sins. And though everybody knows they're not, but they think they ought to be, and so they go around trying to be penitent, or trying to be humble. And they know the more assiduously they practice it, the phonier and phonier the whole thing gets. And so in this way, it's what it's called the technique of reductio ad absurdum. If you think you have a problem, you see, and that you're an ego and that you're in difficulty, the answer that the Zen master makes to you is, show me your ego. I want to see this thing that has a problem. When Bodhidharma, the legendary founder of Zen, came to China, a disciple came to him and said, I have no peace of mind. Please pacify my mind. And Bodhidharma said, bring out your mind here before me and I'll pacify it. Well, he said, when I look for it, I can't find it. So Bodhidharma said, there, it's pacified. See, because when you look for your own mind, that is to say your own particularized center of being, which is separate from everything else, you won't be able to find it. But the only way you'll know it isn't there is if you look for it hard enough to find out that it isn't there. And so everybody says, all right, know yourself. Look within. Find out who you are. Because the harder you look, you won't be able to find it. And then you'll realize that it isn't there at all. There isn't a separate you. Your mind is what there is. Everything. But the only way to find that out is to persist in the state of delusion as hard as possible. That's one way. I didn't say the only way, but it is one way. And so almost all spiritual disciplines, meditations, prayers, etc., are ways of persisting in folly. Doing resolutely and consistently what you're doing already. So if a person believes that the earth is flat, you can't talk him out of that. He knows it's flat. Look out of the window and see it. Obviously it looks flat. So the only way to convince him that it isn't is to say, well, let's go and find the edge. And in order to find the edge, you've got to be very careful not to walk in circles, so you'll never find it that way. So we've got to go consistently in a straight line, due west, along the same line of latitude. And eventually when we get back to where we started from, you've convinced the guy that the earth is round. But that's the only way that'll teach him. Because people can't be talked out of illusions. But now there is another possibility, however. But this is more difficult to describe. Let's say we take as the basic supposition, which is the thing that one sees in the experience of satori or awakening or whatever you want to call it, that this now moment in which I'm talking and you are listening is eternity. That although we have somehow conned ourselves into the notion that this moment is rather ordinary and that we may not feel very well and that we're sort of vaguely frustrated and worried and so on, and that it ought to be changed. This is it. So you don't need to do anything at all. But the difficulty about explaining that is that you mustn't try not to do anything, because that's doing something. And how to explain that? Because there's nothing to explain. It is the way it is now, you see. And if you understand that, it will automatically wake you up. That's why Zen teachers use shock treatment. Sometimes why they hit people or shout at them or create a sudden surprise. Because it is that jolt that suddenly brings you here. See, there's no road to here, because you're already there. And if you ask me, how am I going to get here? It'll be like the famous story of the American tourist in England, who asked some yokel the way to Upper Tuddenham, little village. And the yokel scratched his head and he said, well, sir, I do know where it is, but if I were you, I wouldn't start from here. So, you see, when you ask, how do I attain the knowledge of God? How do I attain nirvana, liberation? All I can say is it's the wrong question. Why do you want to attain it? Because the very fact that you're wanting to attain it is the only thing that prevents you from getting there. You already have it. But of course, it's up to you. It's your privilege to pretend that you don't. That's your game. That's your life game. That's what makes you think you're an ego. And when you want to wake up, you will. Just like that. If you're not awake, it shows you don't want to. You're still playing the hide part of the game. You're still, as it were, the self, pretending it's not the self. That's what you want to do. So you see, in that way too, you're already there. When you understand this, a funny thing happens. And some people misinterpret it. You will discover, as this happens, that the distinction between voluntary and involuntary behavior disappears. You will realize that what you describe as things under your own will feel exactly the same as things going on outside you. You watch other people moving and you know you're doing that. Just like you're breathing or circulating your blood. If you don't understand what's going on, you're liable to get crazy at this point and to feel that you are God in the Jehovah sense. To say that you actually have power over other people so that you could alter what they're doing, and that you are omnipotent in a very crude, literal kind of Bible sense, you see. And a lot of people feel that and they go crazy. They have to put them away. They think they're Jesus Christ and that everybody ought to fall down and worship. That's only they got their wires crossed. They haven't been able to, this experience happened to them, but they don't know how to interpret it. So be careful of that. Jung calls it inflation. People who get the holy man syndrome, that I suddenly discover that I'm the Lord and that I'm above good and evil and so on, and that therefore I start giving myself airs and graces. But the point is everybody else is too. If you discover that you're that, then you ought to know that everybody else is. Well, for example, let's see how in other ways you might realize this. Most people think when they open their eyes and look around that what they are seeing is outside. It seems, doesn't it, that you are behind your eyes. And that behind the eyes there is a blank. You can't see at all. Turn around and you see something else in front of you. But behind the eyes there seems to be something that has no color. It isn't dark, it isn't light, it's just, it's there from a tactile standpoint. You can feel it with your fingers, although you don't get inside it. But what is that behind your eyes, you see? Well, actually, when you look out there and see all these people and things sitting around, that's how it feels inside your head. The color of this room is back here in the nervous system, where the optical nerves are at the back of the head. It's in there. It's what you're experiencing. What you see out here is a neurological experience. Now, if that hits you, and you feel sensuously that that's so, you may think that then therefore the external world is all inside my skull. But you've got to correct that with the thought that your skull is also in the external world. So you suddenly begin to feel, well, wow, what a kind of a situation is this? It's inside me, and I'm inside it, and it's inside me, and I'm inside it. But that's the way it is. This is what you could call transaction, rather than interaction, between the individual and the world. Just like, for example, in buying and selling, there cannot be an act of buying unless there's simultaneously an act of selling, and vice versa. So the relationship between the organism and the environment is transactional. The environment grows the organism, and in turn the organism creates the environment. The organism turns the sun into light, but it requires there to be an environment containing a sun for there to be an organism at all. And the answer to it is simply, they're all one process. And it isn't that organisms by chance came into this world. Put it rather that this world is the sort of environment which grows organisms. It was that way from the beginning. Just in the same way, the organisms may, in time, have arrived in the scene, or out of the scene, later than the beginning of the scene. But from the moment it went bang in the beginning, if that's the way it started, organisms like us sitting here, were involved in it. You see, look here, let's take the propagation of an electric current. I can have an electric current running through a wire that goes all the way around the earth. And here we have our power source, and here we have a switch. All right. Here's the positive pole. Here's the negative pole. Now, before that switch closes, the current doesn't exactly behave like water in a pipe. There isn't current here waiting to jump the gap as soon as the switch is closed. The current doesn't even start until the switch is closed from the positive pole. It never starts unless the point of arrival is there. Now, it'll take an interval for that current to get going and circuit if it's going all the way around the Earth. It's a long run. But the finishing point has to be closed before it will even start from the beginning. In a similar way, although in the development of any physical system, there may be billions of years between the creation of the most primitive form of energy and then the arrival of intelligent life. That billions of years is just the same thing as the trip of the current around the wire. It takes a little time. But it's already implied. It takes time for an acorn to turn into an oak. But the oak is already implied in the acorn. And so in any lump of rock floating about in space, there is implicit human intelligence. Sometime, somehow, somewhere. They all go together. So don't differentiate yourself and stand up against this and say, I am a living organism in a world made of a lot of dead junk, rocks and stuff. It all goes together. Those rocks are just as much you as your fingernails. You need rocks. What are you going to stand on? What I think, awakening really involves is a re-examination of our common sense. We've got all sorts of ideas built into us which seem unquestioned, obvious. And our speech reflects them. The commonest phrases. Face the facts. As if they were outside you. As if life was something you simply encountered as a foreigner. Face the facts. Our common sense has been rigged, you see, so that we feel strangers and aliens in this world, and this is terribly plausible. Simply because it's what we're used to. That's the only reason. But when you really start questioning this, say, is that the way I have to assume life is? I know everybody does, but does that make it true? It doesn't necessarily. It ain't necessarily so. And so then as you question this basic assumption that underlies our culture, you find you get a new kind of common sense. It becomes absolutely obvious to you that you are continuous with the universe. For example, people used to believe that the people who lived in the Antipodes would fall off. And that was scary. But then when somebody sailed around the world, and we all got used to it, and now we travel around in jet planes and everything, we have no problem about feeling that the Earth is globular. None whatever. We got used to it. So in the same way, Einstein's relativity theories, the curvature of the propagation of light, that began to bother people when Einstein started talking like that. But now we're all used to it. Well, in a few years, it will be a matter of common sense to very many people that they're one with the universe. It'll be so simple. And then maybe, if that happens, we shall be in a position to handle our technology with more sense. With love instead of with hate for our environment.